Okay, day 5, Dorothy's Lockdown Diaries. Today I just wanted to talk about planning a trip. I think the planning stages are always the bit that put people off, or I think the part that people get to and then sort of fall at that hurdle, just because I think trips sometimes seem more daunting than they actually are, and then people will overcome themselves with worry and concern that things aren't going to go to plan, and then those trips never happen. I think for me it was helpful that I was thrown in at the deep end. So I left Sydney and rode back to England on 2 days of planning. And that was the first time I'd ever embarked on a motorcycle trip. It was the first time I'd ever camped away from home on a motorcycle. So it very much was in at the deep end. I remember riding out of Sydney that day with the bike loaded up with everything I got. I didn't know where I was going to camp that night. I didn't know where I was going to camp the next night. And so from a relative period of comfort, I was soon on the road without a plan at all. But I think that's where it's important to make a distinction, and that's where I feel that there is two paths. There is planning and then there is research. And I think the two are very different things. I think with planning you're trying to construct order on what is going to be a disorderly world that you're entering. It's trying to control and predict the unpredictable. Whereas research is preparing yourself for the unpredictable. And it's going out there armed with the things you're going to need to be able to deal with the things that come your way. So I think planning and research are two very different things. And for me, yes, I only had 2 days of actual planning. I decided to do the trip on the Thursday and I left on the Sunday. So I had 2 days to go from having just a cheap old bike and have 2 days to get it ready to set off on a journey around the world. What I had behind that, though, was a year of research. It was a trip that I'd always thought about doing, or I'd thought about doing for a while, and so I'd spent a lot of times on the forums such as Horizons Unlimited and on the embassy forums and on the embassy websites. Researching the route, so which is the most common route between Sydney and London. Then looking at what visa limitations or restrictions are in place, what processes I would need to go through. And then also researching Carnet de Passage, which is the document to get your bike into various countries. So there was a lot of time just generating information and knowledge in my own brain. And I know in this instance we're talking about a big global trip, but I think this also applies to a weekend or a week in the UK as well. What do you decide to do? Do you plan everything to the nth degree, or do you just research it? And so for me, to try and put it in a more universal context, say I was planning a trip in the UK, then I would spend time researching what roads I wanted to ride, what are the best roads, what sites are there out there that I might want to see, what cafes are good, what campsites are good, and that's pretty much how I plan the guided trips that I've done. So when we go across America, I'll look what roads I want to ride, I'll look what points of interest there are along the way. But in terms of actually planning a route and having a schedule, day 1 here, day 2 here, day 3 here, day 4 here. I mean, I just think it's unrealistic to think that so many months in advance you can plan exactly the day-by-day breakdown, of a trip that's not even yet taken shape. For me, planning doesn't allow things like punctures or breakdowns, or it doesn't allow you to deviate if you get a sense that you want to spend longer somewhere or go off in a different direction, or you've been told a bit of information by somebody in a cafe that says, you really should do this road or go down there. And so I think that's, for me, is the issue with planning is that it puts you on too tight a blueprint, which then dictates your trip. And sometimes that can be to the detriment of your trip. And so, say for example going across America, or say for example riding Land's End to John O'Groats, it's just about knowing and researching the points of interest, the things that are out there. And then the beauty of the modern age with apps and phone technology is that it takes confidence to build it up, but you can just start planning day by day. You don't know where you're going to camp that night or where you're going to get a motel that night, but with Booking.com or Airbnb or any of those other sites, or PitchUp, and there's so many good websites out there that allow you to join the dots as you go along. And I think that allows you to make the adventure unique and make it your own, and tailor it to the events that take place during your trip. So say across America, the guys halfway across realised there was a Pink Floyd concert in or a tribute band playing in Las Vegas. And so instead of following the route that the rest of us took, they detoured off and went to see Vegas, and they carved out a totally different trip, and they were able to do that because there was flexibility built into it. If there was a night-by-night routine, then we'd have arrived at Las Vegas after the date at which that tribute concert had finished. So I think sometimes planning is the wrong word, and it's the wrong approach. That's not, well, it's the wrong approach for me, and I think that's always the thing. Everyone has got a different approach. If you're someone who likes to know night by night where they're going to stay, and if you're someone who that gives if having that plan gives confidence to, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If a planned day by day itinerary is what you need to get you on the road and to complete that trip, that's absolutely fine, and that works for you, and that's perfect. But I think it's when you start stressing about that plan and whether it doesn't go to plan, and then the fear builds, and then the trip falls apart because you're just so worried that things aren't going to go to plan, that the trip doesn't happen. And I think that's where you've just got to step back and say, right, I've got a bike, I've got the tools I need to keep that bike running, I've got a rough idea of where I want to end up, I've got my camping gear, I've got money to pay for a hotel, I've got an app on my phone that will tell me where I can get accommodation, I've got a rough route, I've got a rough itinerary, I know where I need to be 3 days from now, or a month from now, or a week from now. And I know roughly how I'm going to join the dots, but I don't know precisely where those dots are going to fall on that line. And I think that's not a bad place to strive to. As I say, it does take time to build that confidence. And it doesn't happen overnight. As I say, I was very lucky to be thrown into the deep end. But even then, I'd done all that trip, and then when I was going across America on the postie bike, I used to anguish about where I was going to stay on a night to get to 5 o'clock on an evening. I'd be like, where am I going to camp tonight? And where am I going to stay? And so I think there is a fine line. Too little planning or too little research can leave you anxious. So I'm not saying set off with no plan or no research at all. Just allow a lot of grey in the middle, so that you can feel comfortable that you know where you're heading, but not uncomfortable that you're not going to get to the exact point that you're aiming for, which is kind of a cloudy argument, really. And I think everyone's different. I think that's why there's no hard and fast rules. So I don't think that's where you can say, this is the right way or this is the wrong way. It's just each to your own, and as you do more travelling on a bike and you go further, you'll find what works for you, what suits you. And I think that's the way forward. Anyone spotting this red line, that was a mark I drew on the map. So after I did Sydney to London, I flew back. I wrote a book and I flew back to Sydney for the book launch. And I didn't really have a plan in life at that point. And an idea I had, I'd got a postie bike. I bought another postie bike called Betty from Joe at 110. And the idea after the book launch was to ride to Perth, ship her to Santiago, and then ride up to Alaska and then back down to New York, sort of a second postie bike trip. And again, I'd done all the research for that. I got everything in my mind to make that happen. I got the bike, I got the information on the visas and the Darien Gap crossing and everything else. So I got all the ammunition I needed to make that trip go ahead. What I didn't have was the conviction to make it happen. And I think sometimes that's also an element that we don't always fully comprehend. We have an idea for a trip, but we don't always have that ultimate final moment of conviction that it takes to make it happen. And I think for me, sometimes it's a question of tricking your mind, because you've built up to a point that you want to do something, but you can't ultimately follow through with it. And I think sometimes you just need to make a booking. Say you've never ridden out of England before, you're on a ride into Europe, and you've got everything you need, you've researched it, you know which route you take, a bit like me with this, you know where you like to go in Europe, but you daren't do it. I think what you need to do is just book that ferry crossing, whether it's 6 months from now, a year from now, 3 months from now, just make that ferry crossing so that on that day it's going to happen. And once that's in place, I find once you've taken the first step of booking something or putting something in place, everything else builds around it. Because it has to, because you've put something in place that you now got a focus point. I think when trying to plan a trip or prepare for a trip, it's sometimes easy to get lost in the wilderness. But by making that booking, and for me, really setting off from Sydney to England, the thing I put in place was booking myself on a transport ferry from Darwin to East Timor, and I had 14 days to get from Sydney to Darwin. And so that focused my mind. All this at that moment was irrelevant. What mattered was getting from Sydney to Darwin in 14 days, and that was it. That was the mission. So you know, if you're in Sydney trying to plan and prepare for all this in one go, it would be too daunting. But if you break it down and say, right, this is my first step, I need to get here. Because once you get to Darwin and you've crossed over, that's it. The trip's happening, you know, you're on it, whether you like it or not, you're going, you're doing it. And so it's just about getting out there, but really just even if you have to trick yourself, because you know, I'm the same as anyone. You your own worst enemy. You sow the seeds of your own doubt and question whether you've got it in you or whether you want it enough. And as I say, sometimes you just have to take that first manageable step, and equally acknowledge when it's not the right thing. You know, this for me at that time wasn't the right thing. I didn't make that step, and it's kind of a convoluted message for today. But yeah, planning versus research. I would say research. Get on them websites, Google. You know, you're going around Ireland, let's say. So when I was planning the Irish trip, going around Ireland, I'm taking 18 riders. Okay, good campsites. How do I find good campsites? I Google campsites, and I start looking at reviews, and I start looking at pictures, and I think they're suitable for me or the group, and then I'll ring them up and I'll say, you know, I've got a group coming out, you know, how do you feel about a group? Yeah, fine, no problem. So you start piecing in good campsites, then you start Googling best riding roads in Ireland, because there's kindly people put loads of blogs together on this sort of thing, and you start finding the good riding roads, so you start marking them up on a map. Okay, good riding roads, right, this is this one, pre-sleep, you know, the Connor Pass, there's so many good riding roads, so you think, right, okay, the route's got to go through them at some point. And then you start maybe finding good cafes, or we found what's it called? Father Ted. So you can go into Father Ted's house where it was filmed, and they'll make you a cream tea and things like that. So you think, okay, that's a point of interest. I'll put that on the map. I'll put that in there somewhere. But so you arrive in Ireland with, you know, you've got accommodation stops sorted, which I think you need when you're taking a group, but everything in between, the road in between, it was slightly planned in that I knew which roads I needed to ride, but how we were going to get there necessarily and how we were going to join the dots was still left to chance. It was still left to the elements of rain and weather conditions and road closures and preferences once we got there. And I think that allows a level of excitement, because fear is excitement. The two go hand in hand. Without fear, there is no excitement, and I think that sort of certain uncertainty really makes you excited at the prospect of adventure and the reward afterwards. But as I say, there is no right or wrong in planning or researching your adventure. It's just knowing where to start and knowing how to motivate yourself to make it happen. And for me, it is about booking something, you know, putting that one line in the sand, which I then aim for. So that's it. Planning your adventure. If you're going to Wales for the first time, you know, for a long weekend, or you're going around the world, the same principles apply. Research. Drop an anchor, something to aim for, and just go. Go knowing that you're going to feel nervous, that you're going to be frightened, that you're going to be stepping out of your comfort zone, that you're going to be experiencing things you've never experienced before. And that's it, that's adventure, you know, really, that's what adventure's all about. And it was an interesting, in one of the comments on the videos the other day, somebody said, oh, you know, I really want to do this trip, it's nothing compared to what you've done. And I kind of, it's always an awkward comment, that, because adventure is never about the competition of how far you've been or how challenging it was. It's just about challenging yourself. So, irrelevant of whether you ride from Sydney to London or if you take your first trip on a motorcycle to Wales or Scotland or wherever, there's still the same overcoming of those reluctant emotions. And I think how far you go is, and where you go to, is kind of irrelevant. It's just about making it happen. So yeah, I mean, I remember if I was an 18-year-old boy when I had a TZR125 and I'd have gone off camping, which I never did because I always considered it beyond me. But if I'd have took that bike with a tent on the back and gone camping, that would have been as big an adventure back then as it was 10 years after that, riding from Sydney to London. So yeah, just get out there, research. Right, cheers. I don't know what we're going to talk about tomorrow. Thanks again for suggestions. Yeah, over now. Cheers, bye.